So thank you all for joining today's virtual stakeholder session. The purpose of this session is to get input for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection on potential priority actions to address climate change within the natural and working land sector. My name is Marjorie Kaplan, and I co-direct the New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center here at Rutgers University with my colleague Jean Herb. The New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center at Rutgers is working with NJDEP to gather input from stakeholders on several sectors. Our resource center was established by law 3 years ago, and it provides support and services throughout New Jersey on actions to address climate change here in the Garden State. Jean is typing, or has typed already, the website address for the resource center into the chat box. Before we get started, I want to mention some important housekeeping items. First, there is a simultaneous Spanish translation being provided for this webinar. To join the simultaneous Spanish interpretation portion of this webinar, go to the bottom of your screen, click on the globe icon to select Spanish. I'm going to pause for a minute just to let any of you who want to join the Spanish interpretation portion of the webinar to switch over. Okay, hopefully folks have managed to switch over. A second housekeeping topic that I want to address is that several of you expressed interest in using closed captions as part of this webinar. Matt, who is helping us today, can I please ask you to explain how to use the closed captioning feature on this webinar?
Yes, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button that says CC Show Captions. Just click that and your captions will appear.
Thank you so much, Matt. The third housekeeping topic is that this webinar is being recorded, and this recording, along with the NJDEP PowerPoint presentation from today, will be posted on the DEP's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program website, which Jean is typing into the chat box. So today, we're going to be asking for your input in 2 ways. First, if you have a question or comment, you can raise your hand by selecting the raise hand function, and we'll call on you and unmute you so you can ask your question or offer a comment. And we want to make sure everyone gets a chance to offer their comments or questions, so we will ask you to be straightforward and efficient. Try to keep your comments short if you can, and because we have a pretty large group of folks. Another option is to use the chat box, and if you do put a comment or question in the chat, Jean will be reading it aloud so our Spanish interpreters can interpret it. And we will also be using the chat box to put in links to different websites that may be useful for you. So I'm pretty sure you are all familiar, but just to make sure, to access the chat box, scroll down to the bottom of your screen and click chat. And it's important that when you do type something into the chat, that you chat to everyone so that your communication is captured in our transcript of the meeting. Please note that if anyone participating today is asking a question in Spanish, please raise your hand and we will unmute you, and you can ask your question in Spanish, and our interpreters, who are fantastic, will translate it into English. So thank you. So, and yes, Ken, we will be able to submit longer comments, and we will tell you about that in a little bit. So now that we've covered housekeeping, let's begin our discussion. This stakeholder session is specifically focused on the topic of natural and working lands. The input that DEP receives from you will be used to inform the development of a priority climate action plan, which we refer to as the PCAP, Priority Climate Action Plan, for New Jersey. And this is under the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. So the real focus for this discussion is on near-term priorities around natural and working lands. You can go to the NJDEP Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program website, which Jean is typing into the chat box, to find dates and register for stakeholder sessions on other topics. That same DEP website is a valuable resource for other reasons. There you can find the DEP's program work plan that was approved by US EPA, and you can also find the presentation slides and a recording of the NJDEP kickoff webinar for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. Our agenda today is straightforward. In a minute or two, I'm going to turn things over to the great team we have here from DEP and the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, who will give about a 25-minute presentation on potential priority climate actions for the natural and working land sector that are under consideration for inclusion in the Priority Climate Action Plan. We'll then open it up to all of you to ask any clarification questions on the DEP presentation for about 10 minutes. From there, we'll launch into a discussion for approximately an hour about your thoughts on potential priority climate actions related to natural and working lands that I'm going to facilitate. Following that discussion, we're going to turn it back over to DEP to give a quick update on next steps associated with the agency's effort on this program. We want to stress that you can continue to give input on topics related to natural and working lands and priority climate actions after today by visiting the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program website, where there is an option for you to submit comments online. So one more time, Jean will be typing into the web box where you can go on the DEP website. And so now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Doug Benton of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Doug is a research scientist in the DEP Bureau of Climate Change and Clean Energy, and Doug is helping to lead the development of the state's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. Doug is joined by several other members of the Natural and Working Lands team who are here to listen to your comments and to respond to your questions. So Doug, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Marjorie, and thanks, Jean and the Rutgers team. Can everyone see the slides that I'm sharing? Okay,
Yep.
Great.
Yep, you're good.
All right. So I'm starting us off here. Thank you all for coming to our stakeholder session for the DEP's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. I'd just like to take a moment first to introduce some of the other state government folks who will be presenting some of the information about New Jersey's natural working lands today. So I'm Doug Benton. I'll be the lead state presenter for this section of the meeting. I'm joined by Helene Barr, the Bureau Chief of the DEP's Climate Change and Clean Energy Bureau, Lauren Sinclair and Brian McDonald from the New Jersey Forest Service, and Rachel DeFulmeri from the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, and Josh Moody from the DEP Division of Science and Research. Thanks for being here, you all. I'm going to start off by giving a short overview of what the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program opportunity is, and then my colleagues here are going to take a deeper dive into the natural working land sector and to share relevant background info and some of the initial potential priorities the state has identified. So I know that Marjorie so kindly gave a little bit of an overview of what the CPRG program or PCAP is, but I want to reiterate here with a little bit more detail. What is the CPRG? The CPRG is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which is a two-phase grant program funded via the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. So it's an EPA grant program. The first phase of this two-phase grant program is already underway, and it provided a bunch of non-competitive planning grants to states and local governments to develop a series of climate action plans focused on mitigating greenhouse gases. The second phase is a $4.6 billion competitive grant program, which was actually launched in September. EPA released a notice of funding opportunity in September for this. And through this program, funding will be dedicated to implementation-ready greenhouse gas reduction measures. So due to New Jersey's population density, we're fortunate to have received 4 discrete planning grants that cover portions of our state. New Jersey DEP received a grant to develop statewide plans under the CPRG program, and that is shown in the map in blue with the blue outline here. The New York City Economic Development Corporation, in partnership with the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, received a planning grant covering 12 counties in New Jersey, stretching from Sussex to Ocean. and that's shown in the pink color on the map. Then the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission in Pennsylvania received a planning grant that covers a portion of Warren County, which is shown in yellow on the map. And then the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission received a planning grant that covers portions of 5 counties in New Jersey, which are shown in green on the map. So each of these entities will be producing climate action plans for their respective areas of New Jersey as part of the CPRG program. So needless to say, there's going to be a lot of need for coordination between and across these plans and entities. And so we want to avoid any potential stakeholder fatigue as much as possible. And in an effort to do so, if you're a municipality or a county government located in the areas that are covered by both the statewide planning grant region and a regional planning grant from one of these other organizations, we encourage you to get involved in planning efforts for both. We intend to use the state's CPRG webpage that Jean has shared in the chat to co-promote stakeholder meetings and events across the state between each of these entities in planning. So for phase 1 of the planning of the CPRG, which is these planning grants, there's several deliverables that the EPA has required. The first deliverable is this Priority Climate Action Plan, which we refer to as the PCAP, and that's due on March 1st. As per EPA guidance, the PCAP is meant to focus on near-term implementation-ready greenhouse gas reduction measures. An entity, this is important, an entity can only apply for implementation grant funding for measures that are included in a PCAP. So this PCAP and potential implementation grant funding measures is what our discussions today will be focused around. Looking ahead, though, the second deliverable for the CPRG is a comprehensive climate action plan, also referred to as a CCAP, and this will be due in mid-2025. It'll touch on all sectors and significant sources and sinks of greenhouse gases in the state. And we'll be using this in New Jersey to update the state's 80 by 50 report. And then finally, a status report is the final deliverable that will be due in 2027. And this is where the state will report out on some of its progress to date and intended next steps, including additional financial and staffing needs for these efforts. So EPA, as part of the PCAP, is requiring us to include at least 4 major elements. These are shown in dark blue on the left side of the screen. New Jersey intends to include our 2021 greenhouse gas inventory using our existing methodology for the PCAP to meet that requirement. For the second requirement, we intend to quantify the expected emissions benefits of discrete measures included in our PCAP. And then we will include a robust qualitative narrative about the co-benefits that are going to be realized in low-income and disadvantaged communities from the implementation of these measures. And we intend to also identify co-benefits like improvements to public health or resilience or decreased energy costs and community beautification that may come as a result of these measures. And then finally, we'll highlight any implementation challenges to moving forward with the measures. And that's part of what we'd like to hear from stakeholders about. Additionally, to the extent that time allows, we intend to also include some of these encouraged elements that are shown on the right side of the screen. Some of these things are emissions projections, clear greenhouse gas reduction targets by sector, a robust plan to leverage federal funds, and a workforce planning analysis. So New Jersey has identified 6 priority sectors from its inventory to include as is kind of covered under the PCAP. So we're focusing on the big 3 transportation, buildings, and electric generation sectors, along with the organic waste, halogenated gases, and our natural working land sector, which serves as carbon sinks to help offset the state's emissions. As we've said, today we're here to discuss what stakeholder priorities are and what opportunities exist in the natural and working lands or carbon sequestration sector. We've scheduled additional stakeholder listening sessions for our other sectors, so you can register for those and or when they're available, watch recordings of those on our website. And the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan in 2025 will address all of the sectors shown here and in our inventory. The second phase of the CPRG grant program is the implementation grants. So just to give a little bit of background on what the EPA has said about these grants through its notice of funding availability, those who are eligible to apply for funding fall into two main groups. So entities that have received a phase 1 planning grant. So all of the organizations in New Jersey that we showed on that slide earlier with the map can apply directly for implementation grant funding. Additionally, other eligible applicants are shown here on this slide. So these eligible entities in New Jersey are mainly counties and municipalities. And so those counties and municipalities in New Jersey who are applying to implement measures included in a PCAP can apply for implementation grants directly to the EPA. For example, if New Jersey DEP's PCAP included school bus electrification as a PCAP measure, then municipalities and counties throughout the state could apply for funding to electrify their school bus fleets. A couple other things that the EPA has outlined around applications and the implementation grants. Eligible entities can submit at most 2 lead applications. So they can submit an application as an individual, and they can submit an application as the lead of a coalition, which is defined as a group of 2 or more eligible entities. Eligible entities, however, can be part of multiple coalition applications. Some of the other important ground rules that EPA outlined are that they are not going to award multiple grants to implement the same measures in the same location. Coalitions cannot submit multiple applications for the same set of greenhouse gas reduction measures, including those using different lead applicants. And then applications will be evaluated as a whole and will not be assessed by individual greenhouse gas reduction measures. So just an overview of the key deadlines for the entire CPRG program that's shown here. The green items are deadlines for the implementation grant, while the blue deadlines are deadlines for the planning grants. And then for the state's development of the statewide priority climate action plan, here's sort of a snapshot timeline of what we expect. You'll see that right now we're in this green section of the timeline where we are holding stakeholder events and gathering input for the PCAP. And then we intend to release a draft framework of the PCAP in January for the public to submit comments on. So just real quick, here's a plug for some of our other upcoming stakeholder events regarding this climate pollution reduction grant program. We have several upcoming topical webinars, which are listed here. Food waste is coming up, a highly warming gases webinar, a buildings and electric generation webinar, and a transportation focused webinar. You can register for all of these on our website. You can also submit a comment directly to us, like a written comment, through our form on the webpage. And you can also join our email list so you can hear about any upcoming updates or newly announced stakeholder events. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Helene to take us on a deeper dive into the natural working lands in New Jersey.
Thank you, Doug, and good morning. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your attention and time this morning. So I'm just going to give a really quick level set on the topic of natural working lands and just make sure everybody's on the same page. And then I'm going to hand it off to the expert speakers on each one of these land types. So Doug, if you want to go next slide. So natural working lands play a vital role in mitigating climate change. In particular, our forests, our trees, our tidal marshes and seagrasses, they all remove carbon from the atmosphere and prevent further emissions from contributing to the heating of the planet. These ecosystems capture carbon in the air through the plants, through photosynthesis, and then store that either in the woody portion of the plants or underground in the soils. And here at NJDEP, we often refer to green carbon and blue carbon. So green carbon is when we're referring to land-based carbon sequestration that happens in our trees and forests. Blue carbon, we're referring to carbon that's captured and stored by our oceans and coastal ecosystems. Next slide. So we've identified 4 major land types that are key for New Jersey's climate mitigation efforts. Forested lands are defined as lands that are both public and private, that have forest or woodlands. Developed lands, here we're thinking about the trees and plantings in and around our urban and suburban communities, including street trees, park trees, things like that. Agricultural lands include lands that are farmed, including crops, and farms that are, have livestock. And last but not least, our aquatic habitats, which include our wetlands and coastal resources. Next slide. So New Jersey's forests, wetlands, and preserved open spaces are really key for satisfying our Global Warming Response Act 80 by 50 goal. As I've noted, these lands act as natural sinks and they help to work to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And ultimately, achieving our 80 by 50 goal relies on offsetting our emissions through these lands. In the 80 by 50 report, which was released in 2020, we identified 5 key priority pathways for reduction. This includes looking at opportunities for reforestation, looking at avoiding the conversion of our natural lands. So I know in New Jersey, we have very high development pressure. So a lot of times we're seeing forests and fields being turned into new communities, new buildings, things like that. So to the extent that we can continue to protect our natural resources to stay natural is really key. In this report, we also pointed to the pivotal role that our salt marshes and seagrass environments can provide in terms of storing carbon and protecting our existing already stored carbon in those environments. We also noted the role that agricultural lands can play in terms of using cover crops, nutrient management, and tree planting as well to conserve carbon in those ecosystems. And last but not least, the proactive forest management, making sure that the forests that we do have are healthy and can continue to store carbon in a way that protects their vitality in the ecosystems and the animals that use those ecosystems. So since the release of that report in 2020, the state has moved forward with additional planning documents and implementation. In New Jersey's Priority Climate Action Plan, the PCAP, and our subsequent climate pollution reduction grant deliverables will build upon these existing plans. And I know that it can be confusing to an outsider, right? Just dropping into this conversation to see how all of these plans fit together. So in 2020, New Jersey released its State Forest Action Plan, which is a 10-year strategic plan. It's a holistic look at forests and everything that the state should be doing and is doing to protect that vital ecosystem. The state also released its Wetland Program Plan, which is, again, another holistic document looking at what is needed to protect and enhance our wetlands in New Jersey. And then I want to say last year, we released our scoping document for the Natural Working Land Strategy. And this document was actually an outgrowth of one of the recommendations of the 80 by 50 report. And it really is a plan that's focused on carbon sequestration and how to maximize and protect those resources. So far, the scoping document was released, and there's a commitment from the department to release the final strategy in 2024. And this plan establishes key targets by land type and setting both near-term and longer-term goals. So the PCAP, so how does the PCAP fit into sort of this framework? We're really going to build upon the targets that are set in the Natural Working Land Strategy and be aligned in the direction and priority with both the forest and wetland plans. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Lauren to talk a little bit about our forests.
Thanks so much, Helene. So to give a little bit of context on New Jersey's forests, our state as a whole is approximately 5 million acres, and about 2 million of those acres are forested, meaning that the entire state is about 40% forested. Now, all of the forests within our state are owned by a variety of different groups, including state government, like parks, forests, historic sites, and fish and wildlife management areas, local governments, like counties and municipalities, some federal agencies, like the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Department of Defense, and private landowners. Federal, state, and local governments in New Jersey own 54% of our forested lands, and private landowners own 46% of our state's forested lands. Next slide. So there are some existing programs in the state that address forest carbon and natural climate solutions within forests. And one of those programs is the Natural Climate Solutions Grant Program, which is funded through New Jersey's Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. In regard to non-urban forests and forestry, this program funds forest restoration, reforestation, and afforestation projects. Within the 2020 RGGI strategic plan cycle, we had 2 afforestation and reforestation projects selected for a total grant award of $802,000. And with these funds, 56 acres of forest are going to be restored and about 13,000 trees are going to be planted. And now I'm going to pass this off to Brian, who's going to talk about some of our private and urban forests.
Thanks, Lauren. So within the New Jersey Forest Service, we have the Forest Stewardship Program, which works with private landowners, as Lauren showed on 2 slides ago, that own a significant portion of the forested acres in the state. Our program provides technical and financial assistance to private woodland owners and can fund creation of management plans for products, wood products, as well as wildlife, forest restoration, forest health, invasive species control, and water quality. The other program that I'm going to talk to you briefly about is the Urban and Community Forestry Program. This program assists local governments within the state to help them manage their urban trees and community forests. It helps support the creation of community forestry management plans through grants. It provides training and education for individuals that are involved in those local programs, and it funds tree planting efforts. You can see the statistics there to the right-hand side about the number of active plans, municipalities and counties that are accredited, and then the amount of training that we've given over the past few years. Next slide, please. Thanks. So within the state program, we have 243 communities, which are municipalities that have an active plan for their urban forest. We cover approximately 85% of the population, which are working under a managed or developing canopy. And through some surveys and questionnaires, we know that approximately 416 communities have a local tree advocacy or advisory group. So that could be a committee, commission, board, etc. So 2 programs that are funding tree planting: the Natural Climate Solutions Program, which is funding large-scale urban tree plantings, which you can see on the map at the right, those locations. 7 projects have been selected for a total award of almost $6 million. And the total number of trees to be planted is a little over 4,000. And the other program is the Trees for Schools. Again, you can see the distribution to the right on the map and the locations. And this is to fund tree plantings for K-12 schools and public universities. 34 projects have been selected for a total award of a little over $4.5 million. And 3,233 trees will be planted through this. Thanks.
So I think we're passing it now to Rachel.
Rachel, I
Is that
think
right?
you're on, I think you're muted, Rachel. Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting our department here to give a brief overview of some existing programs that we have throughout the state. And as we all know, New Jersey is the garden state, and we have over 750 acres in active farmland. Preserved farmland is surpassed 277,000 acres and over 9,000 operations throughout our state. But throughout the whole entirety of the state, there is very different types of agriculture that is conducted. So we have a lot of differences within our soils, within our regions and climatic regimes that cause different sorts of operations to be tangible within the state. Our South Jersey sector is primarily vegetables, blueberries, and cranberries. We're over 5th in the nation for blueberry production, just to kind of give a perspective for how much our small state actually produces, which it still astounds me. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea about what the New Jersey Department of Agriculture does, one of our divisions includes the State Agricultural Development Committee. Now this division of our department actually is responsible for the preservation of all the farmland throughout the state. As you saw, that number is over 270,000 acres. So in part of what they do, not only accessing the rights to put conservation easements on us so it stays in a working farm, they also promote stewardship and conservation. The soil and water conservation grants, they provide 50 to 75% of cost share on farms to implement soil regeneration practices and manage the land in order to improve productivity of these soils. Another portion of what they do is they handle the right to farm. So because we're such an urbanized area, there are a lot of complaints about, manure spreading and land application of certain fertilizers and just overall management activities that some of the surrounding public doesn't necessarily understand that it's part of the agricultural operation. So the committee is able to provide protections to our agricultural producers so that they can continue performing their agricultural operations. Next slide, please. And part of my division, the Agricultural and Natural Resources Division, we handle a wide variety of things throughout the state. So we are implementing deer fencing grants to eligible farmers that apply for these grants that are also eligible for non-preserved farms. And I forgot to mention before, the soil and water cost share grants that the SADC provides, they're only eligible for preserved farmland that is either permanently preserved or term preserved. Now we have a program called Conservation Cost Share, very similar to the soil and water grants. However, you don't have to be preserved for this. And then we also tie, I'm going to talk a little bit about that further on, but we're able to tie EQIP monies, NRCS monies for eligible grants. We also help to manage the 14 soil conservation districts throughout the state, which we're looking to also expand upon that. Next slide, please. Now, I don't want to forget to mention that we have many, many conservation agencies throughout the state, including both nonprofit agencies as well as Rutgers, our university, and cooperative extension. There is a lot of work that's going on within this region of all throughout the state, including land preservation and conservation practices that are being experimented on and also worked on so that we can better implement these practices on our farmland and working land. Next slide, please. The biggest thing I had mentioned, the Conservation Cost Share Grant. This is something that I would really like to see expanded upon throughout the state. However, it is lacking in funds, so it's imperative that we really try to target some of the certain practices that are going to be beneficial for providing this grant and expanding upon the program. The biggest thing really is the need for technical service providers throughout the state. And we can go to the next slide, please. So that brings me into conservation planning. So part of being eligible for NRCS funds as well as other state funds is the need to have a conservation plan for your farm. Now this can take many forms. It's very site specific, and oftentimes a technical service provider that's through levels 1 through 4, and it's an actual national program implemented by USDA NRCS for the training. So in order for you to be able to physically write a plan, you have to be a certified conservation planner. And you're certified in different areas of conservation planning, that being animal waste management, nutrient management. There's also forestry specifications. And it's something that is very much needed throughout the state, so that we can further implement and access some of this funds, so that we can get it out to our producers. Also newly published is the 2024 Climate Smart Practices list being offered by the NRCS. And I'm just going to briefly touch on what practices would be eligible in New Jersey, just to be, because it's a very complicated program, but in order for you to be eligible for certain fundings, there are certain practices recognized in New Jersey, and those can be found in your field office technical guide. You could do a Google search of that, and you could see what sort of practices. It also goes through the cost share that NRCS will provide. It's not 100%, but they base it upon an acreage component. And there's also, they're working on an urban agricultural component of that as well, to scale out these practices. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea of some existing NRCS programs, one of the largest ones that is most readily used is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. That's EQIP. I had mentioned that before. Now this implements certain projects, so it's very it's a project-oriented program. So for instance, if you want to put in a heavy use area, so you have or a sacrifice lot, or do prescribed grazing, you would go see your technical service provider. He would meet with you on site and determine what needs to be done in order for you to be eligible for. You would also have to apply for the program as well. We just recently worked with NRCS to, because we have a big problem with our ash trees. So looking at both removal of these hazardous trees, because they have an impact on production, agricultural production, but also replacement of these trees and what that would actually look like. So it's very site specific. Now, your conservation stewardship program, CSP, is something that I'd like to see a little bit more throughout our state. It's more of a total farm project. So it's not just looking at one area, it's looking at multiple different aspects, and it's managing and maintaining some of the conservation measures that have already been done on site. Now, it also helps to give you access to cover crop monies, and then also transitioning over to organic or more conservation minimum tillage operations. Another component of our NRCS programs are their land preservation programs. We have agricultural land easement program, very similar to the structuring that's within, and not to get over into the weeds here, but it's similar to the structuring. And we often work, New Jersey Department of Agriculture works with NRCS to preserve some land easements. And then another aspect is their wetland reserve easement, which I've seen this done before, where a portion of the agricultural land will get preserved under either a state program or federal program, and then another portion of that same land that's in wetland, it's not necessarily productive for agricultural purposes, gets preserved under their wetland easement. So the easement will provide funding for the farmer in guaranteeing that they're not going to be developing the land any further. And then and another thing that I had to mention as well, when you go under preservation, you have to get a farm conservation plan. So that's it's a whole farm strategy at looking at how to manage and maintain the productivity of the land. And I believe that is it for me for now, but feel free to reach out with any questions going forward.
Okay, well, I think next we're gonna start to touch on blue carbon. So that's going to be carbon that's stored in wet soil. So what we're really talking about here is coastal wetlands and SAV beds. So in New Jersey, there's about 200,000 acres of tidal wetlands, and there's a lot of different kinds of them, and they provide a variety of different services. Here, for our purposes today, we're focused really on salt and brackish marshes and SAV beds. Those are very good at storing carbon, which is one of the important services that wetlands can provide. And they do this by they trap organic material on their surface, and then they cover them with sediments, therefore burying them. And once they get buried, because the soils are wet and because they're kind of salty, it helps to resist decomposition and methanogenesis and can help keep the carbon trapped in there. So, even though salt marshes cover only a small percent of the land in the U.S., they account for about 21% of the carbon sequestration by ecosystem services. So they're very important. But the issue is that the wetlands are eroding and drowning, and so that brings up two different issues. When wetlands erode, not only do you lose the capacity to store future carbon, but you can also release some of the carbon that's already been stored in them. Next slide. So in the Natural Climate Solutions Grant Program, what we're looking to do is projects have been funded that are looking to protect and restore some of the vegetated areas that are helping to store carbon long term. So currently the funds were allocated towards wetland restoration and living shoreline projects, 5 of them so far across the state, for a total of $17.6 million. There were along the Atlantic coast in the township of Stafford and Brick, 2 living shoreline projects. At the Lighthouse Center in Waretown, New Jersey, led by the Nature Conservancy, there was a living shoreline and wetland restoration project. And then 2 projects in the Morris River. At the mouth of the Morris River, the American Littoral Society is working on a large living shoreline and wetland restoration, and the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary working a little further upriver around some of the working water fronts, installing another living shoreline project there. So the total acres of wetlands to be restored across these 5 different projects was about 155.6 acres. Next slide. So these efforts are in alignment with a few other programs within DEP. One of them, the 319 grant program that's administered by Water Quality Restoration, the water program with the Water Quality Restoration grants. These are largely non-point source pollution, but they can be used for living shoreline projects and have funded some at Naval Station Earl. They've funded some planning projects in Jeffries Creek and in Toms River in Ocean County, and also a shellfish-based living shoreline project in the Morris River. The Office of Natural Resource Restoration works primarily with polluters to return natural resources to their pre-discharge qualities, quantity, functions, values. So they'll oversee restoration projects that compensate New Jersey citizens for the lost interim value or for the permanent loss of the natural resources. So a lot of these projects can include things like restoration of tidal wetlands and coastal environments. The Blue Acres program, they buy out flood-prone properties to help New Jersey families to relocate. So these vacated lands, they're acquired, and they can be used for natural flood storage, parks, community spaces, and a lot of these efforts can then secondarily serve as carbon sequestration areas. And then there's the Coastal Management Program, and they provide funding to monitor the health and the trajectories of a lot of the coastal wetlands across the state of New Jersey. And this work and these data go in to inform protection and restoration efforts, including living shorelines and tidal wetland revegetation projects. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, Lauren, Rachel, and Brian. So this is kind of the last major slide in this section of the webinar today. And really, we're just throwing some ideas out there. We really want to hear from you all. What are the priorities in your communities and your towns around these natural working lands? And this is really just throwing some spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks. We threw some ideas out here. You know, do you need more money for reforestation? Do you need money for tree nurseries? Do you need do you have a lot of private landowners that could be doing more with their woodlands and forested lands? thinking about agricultural lands, is there an opportunity for more conservation plans to be in your community, for cover cropping, for silvopasture programs? And thinking about our coastal resources, you know, are there more projects out there around the restoration of those tidal wetlands, those living shorelines, and opportunities for us to protect our tidal wetland migration zones? This is by no means an exhaustive list. This was just some of the things that we thought could help, you know, engender discussion later today. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Doug to just give a little closeout.
Yeah, thanks. Following the webinar today, if you would like to submit a written comment, you can go to our website, our CPRG website, which is in the chat, and I'll resend that in the chat again. That is where we have a comment form where you can submit a longer form written comment with a specific topic in mind. If you're interested in registering and attending one of our upcoming other sector stakeholder workshops or any future workshops we schedule, that will also be on our website. And a recording of this webinar should also be posted there following the meeting. So thanks. And I'll pass it back over to Marjorie and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you all. Matt, we good? You can hear? We're
Oh, yeah.
good? Okay,
Yes.
great. Great. Thanks. Thank you so much, Doug, and the rest of the team from DEP and Ag from the National Working Lands team to give this presentation. What I'd like to do now, excuse me, I'm having a little bit of a sore throat. What I'd like to do now is open it up for just a few minutes for any clarifying questions folks have about the presentation you just saw. Please hold questions on broader topics or your comments for just a few minutes. And let's just take any questions now that are to clarify what was presented by the National Working Lands team. And remember, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you to ask your question, or you can type your question into the chat box. So
Marjorie, I'm unmuting Jacqueline Rhodes.
Great. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Sorry, I raised my hand when you said questions a few minutes ago, not clarifying questions. So my questions relate to specifics.
That's fine. So I do have one, Marjorie, in the chat from Robert Burns. He's asking that he's applied for an NRCS grant with the Department of Agriculture. Will those applicants be eligible for consideration for these new grant programs?
So I don't know if that's Helene or Rachel. Rachel?
I could take that. If Robert, if you would share your information, I would like some more specific information about the grant that you applied for, and this way I can better assist you.
Robert, if you want to put like your email in the chat, I'll make sure we get it to Rachel. And then Marjorie, I see a hand up from Ken Dolsky. So I'm going to unmute Ken.
Great.
Okay. Ken, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. No, I understood what you said in the presentation. My question was, there's a lot of moving parts on like the forestry piece of this. So Senator Smith is working on some legislation. We haven't seen it yet. That I think is going to focus mostly on public lands. We have an energy master plan update that's coming out sometime next year. How does all this fit within the context of those kinds of plans that are going to have some weight of law behind them?
Yeah, I think our goal, so thinking today, is really focused on this priority climate action plan that we have to write as part of our EPA grant. And that said, the priority climate action about $4.6 billion of competitive funding that the state can apply for. So our goal is really, so the eligible entities that can directly apply are local governments. So ideally, what we want to hear from you all today is, what are your priorities? What do you think you might apply for, to make sure that we write that in the PCAP and that you can then confidently go after those grant funding. But I think that overall, when we're looking at the big picture, we want everything to be directionally correct with the legislation, plans, and with the upcoming energy master plan. So the energy master plan typically doesn't address natural working lands. It's like more, fuel focused piece to it. But I generally think that we are sort of on the same trajectory, on the same pathway as we've already laid out in 80 by 50 and the scoping document for the natural working lands. You know, like we sort of loosely know what the priorities are. What we're looking for today is to really hear what is the priority within your own communities, within your constituencies.
Yeah, no, I understand, but the energy master plan does use the 8 million, metric tons of sequestration to offset greenhouse gas emissions. So it is important, and they plan to, grow it to 10 million. So it's important to be able to have a reason, a reasonable plan to achieve that.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ken.
Marge, I see a clarification.
Yeah, I see yeah.
Okay, so from Tom Gilbert, are NGOs eligible to be partners in coalitions that seek implementation grants?
Yeah, so the eligible applicants directly to the EPA for the implementation grants are those that we listed. So counties and municipalities, or one of those receiving entities, those who are making a PCAP. So as long as a coalition that the NGO is a part of has a lead, the lead of that coalition is a New Jersey local government, or one of those entities receiving a PCAP, then that should be fine to the EPA.
I just want to suggest Doug and Helene. Helene, you kind of broke up a little bit when you were saying who is going to be eligible. So maybe one of you could repeat that sentence.
Yeah. So Helene, do you want to repeat your sentence, or you want me? Okay. So the eligible entities for the implementation grants are in New Jersey. It is local governments, which would include counties, municipalities, and then the EPA also outlines that air pollution control agencies, tribes, and MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, can also apply. So those are the specific eligible applicants for the implementation grant for the CPRG to EPA. If you're a coalition, a part of a coalition, then you could be a different type of entity that's part of a coalition, but the lead of the coalition has to be one of those eligible entities.
Thanks, Doug.
And Mala put it in the chat. Jean, you want to keep going?
Thanks. Yeah. There's a couple additional clarification questions. I think maybe just two in the chat, and then we can go back to Jacqueline, who had more substantive questions. So from Ellen Silverman, would the grants cover invasive plants management in municipal woodlands? Is that an eligible project area?
I mean, I think it could. I mean, I think so. The grant really needs to show quantified greenhouse gas reductions. So I'm not sure. I'm sure that could be part of a broader plan, but I don't think that alone could be a thing. I think you need to show that you're also planting trees and, doing things that would enhance carbon sequestration.
Great. Jean, did you want to hit Alexandra's question?
Yep. Okay. So next question from Alexandra Moya is, will the tonnage of carbon be cumulative for natural working land? So for example, will all natural working land interventions be rolled up into one larger number? The comment goes on to, well, why don't we just ask that question and then we can elaborate if we need to.
So in terms of the implementation grant, I think for each measure or each thing that you're applying for funding for, you need to show greenhouse gas reduction potential at the measure level. So I don't think it would get all rolled up, but when we're thinking about sort of other documents that the state puts together, like our greenhouse gas inventory, we do roll that up into one number.
Okay, great. Do you anticipate, so part of Alexandra's question was whether you anticipate leveraging of funding with funding, for example, from federal agencies, such as Fish and Wildlife Service or national or NPS on overlapping priorities.
So as part of the PCAP, one of the things that was optional, but that we're committed to incorporating into the state plan is a look at the other funding pieces for each one of these measures. So the PCAP isn't going to be an exhaustive rewrite of the 80x50 report. It's going to be much more narrow and focused, but for each one of those priority measures, right? So if, you know, we collectively believe that reforestation should be a major priority of the state, like as an example, then we're going to identify other funding opportunities to help us achieve that action. So understanding, you know, and if you all have input or thoughts around which one of these funding opportunities should be a priority, like this is your opportunity now to tell us that, right? Like we're all ears. We really want to hear from you again about what's the priority in your community. If you know what's the, you know, funding needs, do you have ideas of existing grants or grants that you're interested in going after? All of that would be very relevant and informative for us as the state.
Okay. That's great. Marjorie, I think we're kind of quickly moving into.
Did you want to get to Jacqueline's question?
Yeah. So let's, we see there's other more substantive questions in the chat, so we'll come back to you, but Jacqueline had sort of started us off. So Jacqueline, do you want to ask your questions?
Sure. Thank you very much. So two, one regarding tree planting and reforestation and the other regarding agricultural lands. The first is if there's going to be a different process for people applying for large-scale tree planting projects. The reason why I bring this up is because the last grant round where that was a priority by DEP, the process was very labor intensive and had a lot of layers in it for municipalities that they just couldn't meet regarding like iTree and having that information available to actually put together an application. There are, you know, PPA, Pinelands Preservation Alliance, had a number of municipalities that were very much interested in tree planting in their communities. We had 6 to 8, but because we couldn't get them and they didn't have, or they hadn't gone through developing like the iTree plans and, you know, identifying, you know, how much carbon sequestration you would get from so many trees, we just couldn't put the application in. So just highlighting that because I think you would get more people putting in for projects for that if, you know, there was a different type of review or analysis or requirement as part of the application. So again, I guess it's more of a comment as opposed to, and maybe others want to weigh in.
And actually, Jacqueline, thank you, because we want to really emphasize that yes, DP and the other agencies are here to answer your questions, but this is also an opportunity for you to provide comments that you want DEP to consider as part of their project.
And may I just state that I think that we're going to be getting at some of those we'll be getting, you'll be getting more opportunity to provide input on these when we get to some specific questions. So I'm wondering, Jean, if we should move into our specific questions.
Yeah, let me just ask Kelly Alexander's question, Marjorie, and then what we'll do after that is we'll transition over to some facilitated questions where we really want to get your feedback. So Kelly asks, what can the funding be used directly to farmers to increase even greater use of cover crops, better inputs, reduction of chemical use, interplanting and interseeding, so to sort of more sustainable agricultural practices, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all on the table. Again, you know, looking at this particular grant opportunity, the climate pollution reduction grant opportunity at EPA, they have very clear criteria about how they're going to be weighting things. So I think if you can show a greenhouse gas reduction or avoided from those practices and quantify that, and in particular, they're weighting very heavily the reductions achieved between now and 2030, and then less heavily between 2030 and 2050. So if you have concrete numbers about, you know, implementing those practices on X number of farms, I think you could make a strong proposal around those practices.
Thanks, Helene. So Marjorie, we'll turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, we're diving in. So just as a reminder, I'm going to put in the chat links to where you can reference the documents that were mentioned, the carbon sequestration chapter 7 of the DEP's 80x50 report. I'm just going to stick it in here now before I forget.
Marjorie, I can do that.
And I did it already. That's okay. And the recordings and presentations from 4 stakeholder sessions that DEP held in March to inform the development of the natural and working lands strategy. So we're going to first talk to you about priorities for natural and working lands to help our colleagues from the state develop the priority climate action plan, and then we'll move into some other questions. And as I pose these questions to you, please keep in mind the sector we're talking about is large, and it can include forested lands, developed lands, including urban forestry, agricultural lands, aquatic habitats, tidal wetlands, and also it could include non-tidal wetlands, but of course we're talking about priorities for carbon. Remember, you can answer by either raising your hand or typing your answers into the chat, and I will put the questions into the chat as I ask them as well. So let's get started. So the first question that we really could use your input on is, what are your priorities for natural and working lands for greenhouse gas emissions reductions and or carbon sequestration? So you can type it in or raise your hand.
I see
Ken. Yeah.
has raised his hand. So I'm going to unmute Ken.
Great.
Thanks, and I'll try to keep this really short. I'm very familiar with the NWLS process. We attended the meeting earlier this year. I guess it was March or April. We sent 10 pages of comments back to the NWLS team. Asked repeatedly for a meeting to discuss these. We got nothing. Our position, and I'm representing New Jersey Forest Watch, is that proforestation on public lands has been demonstrated scientifically to be the best means for maximizing carbon sequestration. What we heard from the NWLS team was other schemes that they plan to employ, such as logging in New Jersey to prevent leakage. That is, log New Jersey so other states don't have to log as much. Storing carbon in wood that you log as a long-term source of sequestration, replacing steel and cement with wood products, and thinning our forests, ostensibly for fire prevention. None of those are going to increase carbon sequestration. They're all going to decrease carbon sequestration. We have the science to demonstrate it. I have never seen science from the DEP that disproves our arguments. It has been extremely frustrating to get an audience with the DEP to discuss these topics. As far as I hate to say this, but as far as I can tell, the NWLS basically was just a plan to provide cover for the DEP to continue to do what it's been doing for the last 12, 14 years, such as logging Sparta Mountain and other wildlife management areas under very, very false pretenses. So we are very, very, very upset with the NWLS process. We are upset with the DEP. It does not use science. It cannot produce science peer-reviewed reports.
So Ken, it's Jean. Thank you for your comments.
I have to meet with them in order to.
That's fine, but we need to give everyone a chance. And so what I see in the chat, the question here is, you're talking about what are not priorities. So the question here is, what are the priorities? And I want to give a shout out to a comment in the chat from Nagisa Manabe, who has offered a comment in terms of priorities, which is prioritizing perennial crops and agroforestry. Are there other comments in terms of the question we put in, which is
Tom Gilbert has a comment in the chat.
Okay.
Did you want to read that, or you want me to read it?
I can read it. So from Tom Gilbert, Tom offers that recent published field research in New Jersey forests found that forests never cleared for agriculture stored twice as much carbon in the soil, than forests that were previously cleared. Tom offers a citation. Thanks, Tom, for doing that. And so Tom offers that a priority should be that these primary forests should be identified and prioritized for protection. And then you'll see in the chat that Tom's included his citation.
Got it. And we see Ken's comment.
Ken offers prioritizing forestation and oops, I'm sorry, my chat's moving quickly, and opposing DEP logging programs on public lands. And
So-
Nagisa agrees with those comments.
Is Nagisa, are you agreeing with both
Ken's
Tom
comment.
and Ken? Just want to be clear, because sometimes there's a lag in when things get typed in.
Or we can let Nagisa respond. I'm looking to see any other comments in the chat right now, Marjorie, or raised hands. I don't see any.
I
other
don't
raised-
see any. I don't see any. Did we want to unmute Nagisa? Nagisa, do you want to be unmuted?
Well, I think if Nagisa asks, we'll unmute.
All right.
All right, so we have we do have a hand up from Tom. So Tom, let me get to you to unmute you. I lost you. There you are.
And I don't see
Matt,
anybody
can
with
you
their
help?
hand up.
Yeah, Tom
I don't-
Gilbert has his hand up, and I'm having trouble here. Matt, can you unmute Tom Gilbert? And while we're doing that, Martha Maxwell Doe offers that priorities should include tidal wetlands, transgression opportunities, and coordination that involve coordination between DEP and the New Jersey Department of Agriculture. And Marjorie, maybe you can read Nagisa's comment.
Well, Nagisa is asking, she is happy to be unmuted.
Okay, well, first
So-
let me unmute Tom, and then we'll go to Nagisa. Tom, go ahead.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I think earlier on you asked about implementation challenges. So one that I'd like to flag is the fact that due to the overpopulation of deer in many of our forests, we have little to no regeneration occurring. And so, of course, that presents a major risk to carbon storage and sequestration over the long run. So I'm wondering about, I noted the comment about the grants that are available to support deer management on agricultural lands. And maybe we need to consider some kind of similar grant program that would help eligible entities with, deer management initiatives and funding that can help, especially as we talk about reforestation and afforestation, right? So deer is it's going to present a major challenge to the success of those projects. So I think we need to build in, as we approach these forest restoration and management strategies, how do we go about those in a way that accounts for the deer challenge?
Thanks. Thank you, Tom. And Marjorie, I'm going to unmute Nagisa.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nagisa. Nagisa, do you want to offer a comment? You're off of mute. Okay, we can come back. Marjorie, I have a comment in the chat. From Constant Katz. We would like to do reforestation on our forest farm, which is a maple syrup producer for quite some time. But deer population is a significant problem. So we're hearing a lot about deer today. And being able to fencing in forest lands not practical with the current emerald ash problem. And so I think in terms of priorities here is echoing what we heard from Tom in terms of deer.
Okay. So we have one more comment from Ken. I don't know if you're going to read it, Jean.
I was going to just double check first with Nagisa. Nagisa, do you want to comment? You're off mute right now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, what I was commenting on was the fact that NRCS practices that are approved don't necessarily include enough agroforestry practices. So I would encourage us to dig into that area and make sure that we have approved enough practices to make it feasible for farmers to afford agroforestry. Because it's very expensive. It's a long lead item. It takes several years before farmers can benefit from it, and yet we need to encourage it. So I think that would be my perspective.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Nagisa.
Nagisa. Thank you. And Tom Gilbert, I see your hand is up. Is that an old hand or is that a new hand? You are
You took it down. It's down now.
Okay, so then we have a comment in the chat from Ken Dolsky, which is that reforestation and afforestation are fine, but they're costly as well. Let's see, we got to Martha's. And don't produce the kind of carbon storage and are a false solution if DEP is looking at, it wants to show increasing carbon sequestration from public forests.
Okay. So I think that's.
And Marjorie, we're being reminded by our Spanish interpreters to please slow down.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, how about if we get, I don't see any other comments and I don't see other hands raised, Jean. And so I'm gonna put the next question in, which is where Tom was going already, and where Jacqueline was. What are the largest barriers and challenges you face in implementing measures to reduce greenhouse gases and or sequester carbon on natural and working lands? So,
and just so everybody knows, Marjorie put that question in the chat as well.
Chat, yeah. We've heard from everyone. Give folks a minute. Wow, crickets.
Marjorie, I see that Jacqueline has raised her hand. And so give me 1 second. And
all right.
Unmute her. There she is. Okay, Jacqueline, you go ahead. You're unmuted.
Thanks. I did post this in the chat earlier regarding agricultural lands, and I guess I'm not sure how much of it is because of not connecting the dots between the programs or because there isn't a specific direct funding source where I'd mentioned converting from conventional to organic farms. So I heard about cover crops and I'm familiar with a variety of the programs that are available. But for me, I see that as a barrier about doing a full and holistic transition of farms where you can have something very specifically calling out, transition to organic that may, take those separate programs and weave them together as almost like a package deal that can really help transition people. Now, assuming they are interested in that, because obviously the cultural barrier, I think, is pretty high for, long time, farmers. But if there was some incentive to make it easier to combine all those pieces together, that, could be helpful. And I know that's something that we're looking to address at through our agricultural program at Pinelands Preservation Alliance. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'd like to talk with you a little bit further about that, even maybe offline too, just to communicate some strategies, because it's really to sometimes the biggest barrier is the market and overall, because there is a risk associated with some of these implementation measures. I think that's part of that barrier as well. But I know that NRCS does have an organic program. They're trying to get more people to convert. But yeah, I would like to talk to you a little bit further, just go over some different ideas and stuff and ways that we can collaborate too, because that's something that I'm very interested in as well. So thank you, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Rachel. Marjorie, there's a couple comments answering your question about obstacles that I can read from Martha Maxwell Doyle. Martha indicates that an obstacle is permitting and the amount of time and money that it takes. Ken Delsky says that the biggest obstacle is DEP continue to log public land, such as Sparta Mountain. I'm assuming it's Sparta Mountain, not Sparta Man. It's impossible to increase sequestration by logging. And then Alexandra Moya indicates that it would be an obstacle. We need a better understanding and accounting for sea level rise in tidal wetland projects.
And there's additional down there, Jean, if you want to read them.
Yep. And so from Tom Gilbert, an obstacle that Tom points to is funding, exclamation point. And hang on, I gotta go back up.
Yeah.
Tom indicates that many entities that manage land, including local governments, NGOs, private landowners, need more funding to implement beneficial practices. For NGOs, funds are needed for both practices and staff that carry out the work. Grant programs need to be simplified so that more entities can access and implement them. Marge, I'll just keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so, and from Nagisa, we hear see, it's funny, my check moves as if people add in. Nagisa indicates, in general, the big challenge is that NRCS through EQIP, the contract ability to cover the real costs, which are not reflecting the costs of doing business in the state of New Jersey. And Guy Colina indicates that a couple years ago, he tried to obtain tree seedlings from a state farm in Jackson, and little was available. Little seedling was available. It'd be nice to be able to obtain seedlings locally at a reduced cost compared to private sources. From Kelly Alexander is that NOFA New Jersey, the Organic Farming Association, has conservation funding now at this time and much more. Let's see. I think I am up to date.
Yeah, I think you are too. Did you get to, yes, you did this.
Yeah.
All right. I think we should move to we want to get, there's a lot more things we want to hear from you on. So I think I'm going to put the next question in. How's that? So, because this is something DEP really wants to hear from you on. What projects do you have ready to go to be implemented in the short term on natural and working lands? And if you want to state who you are or what organization you're with, that's great to help.
Thanks. So again, the question Marjorie's asking is, what projects do you have ready to go that can be implemented in the short term? Because again, the PCAP is intended to be shorter term that relate to natural working lands.
I'm assuming folks are typing. I don't see anybody's hand raised, Jean, but
Okay, we can sit quietly for a minute as we give people a chance to. Okay, Tom.
Somebody does have
Tom has raised his hand. So Tom, go ahead. You are off of mute. Oh, go ahead. Tom, go ahead. I think I muted you.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
yes,
we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but you're not getting a ton of input, so
it's totally fine. That's why we're here. It's why we're here.
I would mention, so we've been working with the Sourlands Conservancy on tree plantings in the Sourlands on our new Rainbow Hill Preserve at the Sourlands that was just opened. There's more work to be done there. We've been doing Atlantic white cedar plantings on the Franklin Parker Preserve as well. And again, more opportunity there. And the Sourlands, in addition to the tree plantings, just this issue of like fencing and deer, understood, like fencing at scale is cost prohibitive. But again, with the Sourlands Conservancy, we've been fencing, we call little islands where you have areas where you have good native forest regeneration, identifying those areas and fencing those areas, which can, really help to, help along, native forest and plant regeneration in certain areas. And because these are relatively small areas, it is financially feasible. So those are just a couple things that I would mention, that, again, more funding to continue to expand those types of projects on lands held by NGOs. We could do more good work like that.
Thank you. And Marjorie, I'm assuming that the just to clarify your question, which is, about what kinds of projects do the folks who are participating today have ready to go, their organizations or their communities or their local governments, right? Okay,
Yes, so I think though so Nagise has been not chatting the whole group, so I don't know if you can see it,
okay.
Jean. And so so Nagisa mentions a project that Rutgers and NOFA, New Jersey are working with Division of Fish and Wildlife to transition 500 acres from conventional to organic farming. And yes, Nagisa, I do recall this project, and it's exciting to hear that it's going forward. And so my question back to you is whether these are the kinds of things we'd want to encourage more of, is what I think you're getting at. But because you're typing. Yes.
And we're very lucky. The USDA has offered to fund some of it through their land and market access program, which will allow us to actually fund technical assistance to do this, because I think another big barrier is technical assistance to do it right, to do it effectively. And so we now have quite a bit of funding through NOFA, we're delighted to say, and we can reinvest that in these programs. But yes, more land, I think more, there's so much open preserved land. It would be great to see more of it going into these programs so that we could accelerate your agenda.
Marjorie, Jacqueline Rhodes from the Pinelands Preservation Alliance indicates that PPA is working with several municipalities in South Jersey that are ready to plant up to 100 trees. And I'm gonna scroll down.
And then Constant Katz had a note. Do you want me to read? I thought you.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So Constant notes that we're meeting today with NRCS on an application to seek assistance in dealing with dead, dying ash in their woods and sugar bush.
And Guy Colina indicates that if, just to follow up on a comment that Guy had earlier, if trees are available from Jackson, Guy would plant them next spring. So getting ready for the spring. Let's see, Jacqueline also indicates that PPA, Pinelands Preservation Alliance, also coordinates with the New Jersey Landscape Makeover Program with more than 40 municipalities who are interested in green stormwater infrastructure projects that include naturalization of basins, removal of lawns, and conversions to bioswales, and more examples of projects that reduce carbon as a result of reducing mowing.
That's great. Tom, is your hand still up, or is it need to come down, or do you want to up? It comes down. Okay. Just checking. Just checking. All right.
I think we're caught up on comments in the chat, Marjorie.
Yes, I think we are. All right. So why don't we move along? And now that we've talked about everyone's priorities for natural and working lands, can we get some insights on how these actions will impact low income and disadvantaged communities? So I'm going to put my next question into the chat box, which is, what are the potential benefits that these actions on natural and working lands could bring to low income and disadvantaged communities? So here I will type that in, and folks can either put it in the chat or raise their hand.
And while Marjorie's typing, I guess I'll just clarify. So that can include the what are the benefits from some of the things that all of you have mentioned today, or also from other potential actions associated with natural and working lands. So part of the development of the Priority Climate Action Plan involves being able to document benefits from the actions that the state will be proposing, the benefits to low income and disadvantaged communities. So we'd like to hear from you on what you think some of those benefits might be.
Okay, so.
And I see Jacqueline is pointing to the South Jersey Farmers Equity and Sustainability Task Force, which is South Jersey FEAST, F-E-A-S-T, where PPA, Pinelands Preservation Alliance, and its partners, that's a lot of P's, all the partners seek to create a collaboration of farmers and nonprofits to improve soils, water, and air quality by incentivizing regenerative farming practices through new and improved market systems, and support local growers and bring locally produced food to new and underserved communities. So that's kind of issues related to restoration, as well as creation of jobs, as well as addressing food security issues, all in one very compact comment. Thank you, Jacqueline. Nagisa points to that urban land access continues to be a challenge, and that any support that can be created to help communities to access urban lands, I'm assuming that means natural spaces, would be great. Thank you.
Nagisa's always one step ahead of the questions. All right, Tom. We're partnering with the food.
Tom Gilbert is saying that we're partnering with the Food Shed Alliance to provide low-cost leases to underserved farmers on preserved farmland, and to assist those farmers in implementing climate-friendly agricultural practices. This model could be expanded on state, local, and NGO lands with financial support. Thanks, Tom. Any other thoughts on benefits to disadvantaged and low-income communities?
All right. So we had okay, Nagisa.
Nagisa is pointing out that soil contamination of soils continues to present issues. And Nagisa, I'm assuming that you mean to certain underserved communities, and that
yes, because practically speaking, the only solutions that are really available to urban communities are raised beds or bringing in soil. And I think a question would be, is there any resource to remediate soil? And I know that some groups in Rutgers, Newark, and Ag Extension are supporting remediation, but it's slow going and it's a challenge, and it requires more funding to identify quicker solutions. So I would say that that is a great place for the university to add some support.
Thank you.
And that's even true of some of this low-cost land that is available for lease. It is also often contaminated. And I think a big issue is that most people are not factoring in the cost of testing the soil in a large-scale way to make sure that it is safe to farm on. So that's another challenge, I think.
Okay, thank you, Nagisa.
So I think following on that, if we don't have any other hands raised,
I think
so. A question. So I think, you know, another way to think about it is, what ways could these actions be implemented to maximize benefits to low income and disadvantaged communities? Could there be certain priorities or incentives for where they're implemented?
Or in other words, could the ideas that some of you have raised today, and or some of the ideas that DEP raised today, be implemented in ways that, if implemented in those ways, would really maximize benefits to low income and disadvantaged communities?
Okay. No takers. we've heard some, but okay. Then we also have heard some of the other things that we would like to hear a little bit more about, is similar to Nagisa was getting at, is do others want to talk about possible negative impacts to low and income and disadvantaged communities from these priority actions? It's a little bit of a different question, but is there a maladaptation or
and I guess just again, just to clarify, we know that as part of NJDEP's submittal to EPA as part of the Priority Climate Action Plan, the expectation is that the agency will identify both benefits as well as potential disadvantages or disbenefits. I see that Jacqueline is indicating that we need every parcel of land. So I don't know if we need to prioritize certain areas for natural working lands. We also want to encourage you all to put your hands up and offer
Talk to
comments.
us. Yeah.
Right. So it's not just Marjorie and I talking to ourselves. Thank you,
right.
Jacqueline.
I guess so. I'll ask this a different way, maybe. So I'll put this way because I think this is sort of a question we want to get at is, are there certain actions on natural and working lands that would bring the greatest benefits to low income and disadvantaged communities?
I like that question, Marjorie.
Thank you. I'm trying to help Janine.
I see that Russ Finari has raised his hand. So hang on, Russ. I'm not that fast.
And Tom Gilbert says more urban tree plantings.
Okay. Russ, you're unmuted. You should be able to talk now.
Okay. So, you know, Tom is thinking right along my lines. You know, when we talk about brownfields, you know, there's less, I think there's less restriction if we're talking about planting 4 trees, and urban forest lands or you know, things like that, as opposed to, you know, food sources. So when you're doing it, if you're doing a community garden or things like my friend Tobias Fox does, where, you know, he's got to worry about what's in the soil, and so they use raised beds or they do things differently to protect against, you know, any contaminants, potentially even minor ones, getting into the food crops that they're trying to promote for the community. But if you're planting trees, you're not necessarily worried about the same things. And there's plenty of examples of brownfield stuff that's been converted to forest or parkland and is perfectly safe for people to go to. They're doing things, you know, some of that now with some projects that are targeted along the Passaic. And I think, you know, using some of these funds to support those types of things, whether it's, you know, waterfront park area that you know, achieves a stabilization in those areas, as well as providing green space in an area. You know, the work that was done in Newark along the Passaic in the Ironbound is a good example of, you know, how that could be used. And you know, most of that land was contaminated at some level. Some of it had to be, you know, dealt with, but most of it was capped, and, you know, they planted trees. So I think that's one way to do it, and really maximize the benefit for the, you know, overburdened communities.
Thanks a lot, Russ.
Thanks so much, Russ. And then we also had a comment just echoing Tom Gilbert's comment in the chat that what's needed is more urban tree plantings, and Jacqueline Rhodes agrees with Tom and also adds to that, suggesting that having an easier grant application process would be beneficial. And Ken Dulski suggests that we engage with community-based environmental justice organizations to raise this issue as well. Thanks.
And Martha is asking.
Sorry. Thanks, Marge.
Martha is asking, and this is a question for the DEP and Rachel and the Ag team. Is there match requirement for this funding?
And I'm assuming where Martha's going with this question is that could be a little bit of a hurdle with regard to disadvantaged communities. Doug,
yes.
Are you able to answer that question?
For the CPRG implementation grants, I do not believe there is a match requirement, but the applications, EPA said they are going to evaluate the applications based on a lot of different criteria, and one of those things is like the cost effectiveness of the investments in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which Elaine mentioned. The other piece is that sort of like, how are you leveraging other forms of funding? So it certainly would help to have some match or other funding available in those applications. I can drop a link to the EPA's notice of funding availability, which outlines all of the stipulations and rules for the implementation grants in the chat as well.
Great.
That would be super. Thank you, Doug. And then Marjorie, we have a comment from Kelly Alexander in response to your question, which is pointing to food sovereignty and food security, more greater access to nutritious food and ethical, culturally appropriate fresh food in local markets, the prioritizing urban community gardens that need protection through permanent zoning.
Great. I don't see any other hands up.
I don't right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we'll move on to the next category. What do you think, Jean?
Go for it. Go
Okay.
for it.
So our colleagues from the state would also like to hear about your insights related to workforce development associated with potential priority climate actions for natural and working lands. So I will put Doug has put that in the chat. Thank you. So I'm going to put this question to you all. What are the most pressing workforce challenges in achieving or implementing priority actions on natural and working lands?
Again, this question is something that the state DEP needs to make a demonstration on as part of its submittal to EPA of the Priority Climate Action Plan, is for any of the areas that the DEP would be prioritizing, is being able to offer insights as to opportunities for workforce development and challenges associated with workforce development, particularly with regards to disadvantaged and low-income communities. Any thoughts on workforce development issues?
So I could ask this a different way, a little bit. It's not a different way, but it's sort of a different twist on it. Russ says he'd suggest targeted to organizations like Groundwork Elizabeth and ISLE, who focus this area.
And Nagisa Manabi also suggests that earlier in today's discussion, there was a mention of technical assistance and mentorship, which also deliver benefits in terms of workforce development. Thank you.
Yes, and Rachel touched upon that in her presentation as well. And also, I think, in the discussion about forestry.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on workforce issues?
I see that. I see that. Nagisa, enhancement of ag extension staffing. I don't think we disagree with that, but we can't state what our opinions are about anything here.
Other thoughts on this topic? Let's see. Guy Molina is pointing to the TPS provider that Guy works with, is a forester for the UDSCD. Guy, I think I'm going to need help with those acronyms.
I think it's that
person will be retiring. Yeah. Let's make sure that person's replaced.
I think that's the Soil Conservation District.
Okay.
Guy, do you want to tell us which Soil Conservation District it is? Or is it the USDA? Is that?
Well, I think the point is that this person's retiring, so we need to
make sure that there's.
It's the Upper Delaware Soil Conservation District.
Thank you,
Rachel. I couldn't grab it out of my ancient head that quickly.
No worries. Mine is crusty too. Don't worry.
Well, we're continuing to hear about workforce challenges. I don't see any hands raised, but I will say, one of the questions we're interested in learning about is if you were going to hire people to work to implement the priority actions on natural and working lands, what type of jobs would these be? What kind of skill sets would be needed by a potential employee? What kind of people do you need to hire?
Nagisa is pointing to that.
Yeah.
We've been talking about possibilities for salary enhancement so that beginning farm workers have a living wage.
Thank you, Nagisa. So that's also getting at the challenges in recruiting individuals from low income and disadvantaged communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Others have thoughts about this?
And Marjorie, while we're pausing to see if there's other comments, I do want to give you a time check that we're almost at 11:45.
Yeah, we're good. Time. So another question we were interested in is if there's any kind of special training that's not currently available, but needed to prepare individuals for jobs in the natural and working land sector, especially for individuals from underserved communities. I see no hands. Jean, do you see any hands?
I do not, Marjorie.
So we observed that apprenticeship and other forms of training are available for other careers and professions, but really aren't geared towards agriculture. So that is it's sort of a corollary to my earlier point, but is there some way to develop a statewide apprenticeship program so that we can actually train up people and do outreach to encourage them that it's a viable career path?
Thank you. Okay, Marjorie, I think you're good to go.
Yeah. So another question we have here is, in underserved communities, what are the challenges in recruiting individuals from these communities to work in this sector? Just curious, are there, is there a need for wraparound services like childcare, transportation, things of that nature? Don't. Right. Well, Jean, that was kind of our list. I think we at time?
We're at 11:45.
So I think we want to
you wanted us to have DEP sort of talk about next steps.
Mm-hmm. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to speak with us this morning and for all of your comments and your insights. And I'm going to turn it back to Doug at DEP to offer thoughts on next steps.
Hi, thanks Marjorie, and thanks Jean. Thank you everyone for attending today's workshop. I'm just going to drop.
Doug, you're muted.
Sorry, I pressed the space bar when I tried to drop that in the chat. It muted me. So thank you to everyone for attending the meeting. And as a follow-up, please check out our website and register for any of our upcoming stakeholder workshops that we have for each of the other sectors included in the New Jersey's Priority Climate Action Plan. We also have a comment form on that webpage where you can submit a written comment for a specific topic. So
and Doug, and then DEP will post the recording and the presentations from today on that same site.
Yes, correct. That's where you'll find the recording.
Great. Thank you. So on behalf of DEP and our Resource Center, thanks for joining us. And we've already mentioned the recording will be present on DEP's website. And I think you put that in the chat. And I think we're good to go. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.